Hey Bluffdale, it's me, Jeff Steele. I'm running for city council, so I thought I would get on here and make another video about my favorite topic, budgeting and taxes. And specifically, I want to talk about this picture that I'm showing you right here. And talk about what this picture means, because it's something that the city likes to share a lot. So what are we looking at now? This is a property tax comparison to the cities in our county, right? Bluffdale's on the far left, and you can see this black line that runs across everybody else, so you can see how we compare to others. Now, we are not the lowest in the county. Draper and Sandy are lower than us. I consider them really best in class when it comes to managing their taxes and their finances, which I'll kind of get into a little bit more, but they're the best. And then after them really kind of comes us in a group with a couple other cities that like Cottonwood Heights, West Jordan, South Jordan. We're all a little bit over that 0.001%. So we are definitely, not towards the top. We're down on the lower end. So that in and of itself is a good thing. But what this chart doesn't tell you, there's actually two things I want to talk about that make you think differently and kind of consider what is really happening with our property taxes and fees. So like I said, we're still on the low end, which is good, but this graph doesn't show our history. And like I've mentioned in some of the other videos, or been talking to you all, you may have heard me say that we've actually, the current our city has raised taxes or fees 3 different times since 2017. So yes, we're kind of on the low end in the county, but we're moving in the wrong direction. Like I said, I consider Draper and Sandy to be best in class, and we should be going towards them and staying in line with them, not moving towards these other cities that have higher taxes and fees, which I consider bad taxes and budgeting philosophy and planning. So we're moving in the wrong direction, and I'm worried that if we elect the same city council leaders, we're going to continue that. That's their track record. They voted in 3 taxes and fees since 2017, but they also voted 2 other times to have property taxes be increased, but those were overturned in a referendum. So their track record is moving towards these other higher cities, not moving towards Draper and Sandy and staying in line with other cities like South Jordan and Cottonwood Heights. So that's concern number 1. Concern number 2, you see this little blue part above our chart as part of our graph there, and that is for a police and fire or public safety fund. Now, what is that? So that's not a property tax, but that's a property fee that was put in place in 2024 by our city because they lost the 2 referendums, so they decided to go with a fee instead of raising another property tax. But that fee is actually more concerning, and this separate police and fire fund is actually more concerning because if you look at all the other cities that have these blue and red public safety funds and additional fees, what do you notice? Well, you notice that all of them that have these are much, much higher than Bluffdale's tax rates right now. Harriman, Riverton, Midvale, Taylorsville, South Salt Lake, and Mill Creek being the worst are all among the highest in terms of property taxes. Only really Salt Lake and West Valley City are much higher than us without these public safety fees. But having these separate public safety funds, I believe, is a recipe for much, much higher costs for us as residents and taxpayers. The reason why is because as you create these other funds, you're actually restricting your money more. So instead of collecting all of our revenue into the general fund for certain parts of the city, we're actually dividing it up. And so what happens is, let's say we have an expense or we have something that we have to pay for. Well, now we can't consider all of our money to help pay for that bill. We only get to consider a part of it that's not in that public safety fund. And so that restricts us. And that could lead to much, much higher fees and taxes in the future. I mean, this graph just tells you very obviously that if you are a city that has a public safety, police or fire fee or fund structure, you're gonna be much more expensive compared to the others. A perfect example is Riverton, our neighbor, right? They have tons of businesses, they have tons of residents, they should have tons of money. Well, and so they should have low taxes, right, you think? But no, Riverton actually doesn't even have a property tax. They have only police and fire fees as a separate fund. But what has that result of that been? They have more than double the cost when it comes to their property taxes and fees than we do, despite having all these new businesses and growth and way more people than we do. So that's not something we want to be. We don't want to be like Harriman, which is almost 3 times the amount of property taxes and fees that we have because they've set up these separate funds. Mill Creek, Midvale, Taylorsville, South Salt Lake. These are the most expensive when it comes to property taxes. And with our new police or fire fee, that's the direction that we're going. And we're going to become a much more expensive city if we leave that in place. So that's one of the things I want to talk to you about. And you're probably asking yourself, well, what about police and fire, Jeff? Like, how do we pay for them? Well, that's a great question. So if we were to remove that separate fund, all of their money would go back into the general bucket, right? And we could consider all of that money together. Now, what you need to do to protect the police and fire is we need to mandate, hopefully legislatively, force the budgeting to say we take all of our revenue in one pool, and now we have to, by legislation or mandate or some kind of rule, police and fire must be funded first before everyone else, to whatever the appropriate level is that we think as a city council, so that they never have to be the target or in the crosshairs of these divisive tax increases that, well, if I don't get a tax increase, I don't have enough money for police and fire. We should never be having that discussion as a city. We should never have a situation where the police and fire don't have enough money. They should be the first priority. And that's one thing I want to do is I want to mandate or legislate that their department gets the funding from that one source, that all the money put together comes from one source, and they are first. Then we can say what's left from our revenues, and then we divide that among the other priorities that are not as critical. And then therefore we can never say, oh, we don't have enough money for police and fire because we've spent it on parks or other areas. That to me is unacceptable, and that's how we correct the problem, at the same time as removing these unnecessary separate public safety funds and fees. Again, that only leads to higher costs and worse tax policy as a city. As you can clearly see from this picture again, Harriman, Riverton, Midvale, Mill Creek, Taylorsville, South Salt Lake, they're all double, almost triple. Mill Creek's is 5 times as high as we are because they've used this separate police and fire fund strategy, and we just need to avoid that at all costs. So again, if we leave the same city council leaders in place, I'm fearful that's going to be where Bluffdale is going with this structure. We need to go back to following what Draper and Sandy again, remember, they're considered best in class. They're the lowest, most efficient, most responsible spending cities. And we need to model them, not these other ones that have grown taxes and fees to outrageous levels. So again, I hope you, as you look at this picture, you kind of think about it a little bit different, understand where we're at, but more importantly, where have we been going? You guys have the choice. Do you want to stick with our current leadership that has been raising taxes and fees 3 different times since 2017 and instituting these kind of restrictive tax policies and separate funds that are going to make it more expensive for us to live in? Or do you want to elect someone like me that's going to be really, really tough, keeping us in line with the best in class cities like Draper and Sandy going forward, and keeping our taxes low and being much more responsible with spending. So I hope you'll support me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you learned something. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you so much.